Hi, in this lesson I'm going to be showing you how to carve this stamp, this ink stamp. Now I was at a craft supply store the other day and I found this. It's a nice big ink pad, and so I just measured that and I'm going to make a stamp that is about that size, just a little bit smaller. And so when I'm finished with it, I can press it on there and then press it onto paper and then it will transfer. So with that in mind, we need to think about this. I've never done this before, so I'm going to have to kind of think backwards because everything that is high on the highest parts of this, which is actually going to end up being that final original surface of the wood, that is what is going to come in contact with the ink, and that is what's going to be transferred. So with that, just some things to think about when you're coming up with designs of this. If you're going to be doing a line drawing, everything that is not the line has to be lowered down, leaving this line drawing. Okay, so that line is going to be what's transferred. That can be kind of tricky because you've got these very thin lines that are actually going to be raised, and they can be pretty delicate. Sometimes having something a little bit more solid, maybe with some texture lines, might end up working a little bit better. So that's what I'm going to do for this one. All right, so what I've done is I've just drawn on this. This is the size of the stamp. That's basically the bottom edge there. So I've got a little frame around it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the frame, but maybe do some sort of texture lines around that. And then I just drew this tree. So what I'm going to do is all of this area. Now this is a live oak tree. You can see the little Spanish moss hanging down there. We'll see. We'll see if that stays. Because what's going to happen is the grain is going across this way, and that's very, very fragile. So we'll see if we still have those at the end of the project. So this whole surface there is all going to be lowered down. And then the surface that is going to come in contact with the ink is going to be the trunk, all of these branches, and then the leaves. All right, now there's going to be some various points in here that are going to be carved away. So there's going to be some random areas that are going to be without ink, and then also some texture lines on the tree trunk. And so anyway, so the trick with this is to kind of think in reverse. So what you want dark is the part that you are not going to carve. Okay, so that's where you have to keep in mind. What I'm going to do, now I'm just going to be clamping this tightly. And now if you don't have a large workbench like this, you can always clamp just the surface, the area where you're not carving. You can also take this and attach it with double-sided tape. You can attach it to a larger board and then clamp that. And that just holds it temporarily so that you don't have all the clamps in the way of your carving. And no, the clamps also don't damage the carving. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my V-chisel and I'm just going to outline a lot of this right now. Okay, so I'm just going to take my V-chisel and outline that. Now, the interesting thing is, now this is actually going to be more of a test for me, is the depth that you are going to be taking this down really is going to depend. I'm not sure how this is going to work. I guess it depends on how soft the ink pad is. And I can see a little bit there. That is not the sharpest V-chisel. But I'm just, since this is really just simply removing the it's not really defining anything right now. I'm just starting to remove this. All right, you know what? Put that one aside and use a better V-chisel. Okay, that's a little bit better. Yeah, much better. Yeah, when you're going across the grain, making these cross grain cuts, and it just wants to kind of tear and chip the wood. Fortunately, I've got some to spare, so if one gets dull, I can always use another one. But if you need to sharpen any tools, I've got quite a few lessons, quite a few videos on sharpening curved gouges and V-chisels. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to create a nice clean edge there. And now just very randomly going along the outer edge of this. Now I haven't really, I just really threw a shape together, nothing. So when you go around with the V-chisel, it doesn't necessarily have to match exactly the lines. All right, now this is where I need to be careful going along the bottom edge there, because I want to have that Spanish moss still high, so we don't, so that's going to also transfer. We'll see how that works. So just very thin drapery of Spanish moss. Now, be careful because the grain is going this way, and these are very, very thin areas. Very thin, tiny pieces of wood. And actually, this is really where using a very sharp V-chisel is even more important. I'm going to add another one right there. It's called redesigning on the spot. Okay, so as I was saying, the depth of this really depends on how squishy that ink pad is. That's a good question. I'm just going to use the pencil one. It's actually pretty sturdy. So, because then when you press it, is it going to settle into... You know what? It shouldn't matter. I was going to say, is it going to settle into the background? But it doesn't really matter if it does squish into the background, because when you press it onto the paper afterwards, the paper isn't going to get all the background. Even if you end up getting ink into the background, it's not going to transfer. So, yes, so these are just things to think about in the process. And again, like I said, I've never done this before, so it's always an adventure. Oh, I just completely took away all of this little Spanish moss. Oh, no. Quick, there's still some room here. Oh, man. I'll do a couple extra ones here. Fill in some. All right, well, anyway. Hopefully it won't look too lopsided. Oh, well, there's more Spanish moss on that side. Anyway, okay, so now, actually, while I'm here, I'm going to do a little bit of this here, because those are also going to look like they're that, the area behind. So the nice thing about trees is they are so random that you could kind of do a lot with it, and it's not going to be wrong. Okay, and now I need to be careful of bows. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a number 9-5. Okay, it's a nice curved one, and I'm just going to start to take the background down. Now, the reason I'm using this small one is because there's a lot happening, especially as I come in here. And sometimes it's just easier to control it rather than just take a very large gouge. And it also will come up against this edge and do a nice clean edge. Or cleaner than if you have a large one. All right, now I'm not going to space that one out, and hopefully I'll still have some Spanish moss there. Okay, so really the thing that you need to keep in mind is all of the area that I'm not touching, that is not being carved, is going to be part of the ink. It's going to have the ink that's transferred. So, you know what? I can probably add some more of that anyway. I'll see if that makes sense. I don't know if it's going to make sense or not. Let's just take my V-chisel, because there's that gap now between the branch and the Spanish moss, and I just am not sure if that's going to make any sense. It's going to look like it's kind of in midair, so I may have to remove those if it doesn't make sense. Whoa, that's a tiny little space there. We'll see how it works. And the thing is, it doesn't matter how clean this background is, except, you know, just if you want it to look nice, just visually to have this as a design. But this background really, as long as it's lower than that original flat surface, it doesn't really matter. If you're just simply using this for an ink stamp. Okay. Just be very careful. All right. Now make sure none of this is that original surface. It's a little hard to tell sometimes. That one might be. All right, now these areas here are also going to be lower down. Now, if any of you have done the ink block printing, it's a very common art class in college and high school, where you actually are taking away the lighter areas and leaving the dark areas. So this is really very similar to that. So if you've ever done that, a lot of times they end up using smaller gouges. So it's very, very similar. Only usually that ends up being on a larger scale, where you're actually doing like a full print block design page. But it is basically the same theory. Okay, now I could just go straight across that way too to clear that area, but just because I'm liking the pattern of this all going in one direction, even though it's not really going to make a lot of difference with the ink itself, or the print itself. So now I'm just going to do a little cleanup along that little edge there. Okay. All right, let's see what's happening. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my V-chisel and I'm going to do a little bit of a separation between the tree trunk and the leaves. And I hope that's not going to mess things up. All right, and then just randomly, I'm going to have large sections, small sections, just sections along here that are going to Create little hollows, where the light shines through a bit on the leaves. Don't want to do too many, but just enough to just kind of break it up a little bit. Really tiny ones. And completely random. And some maybe going off the edge. And then just some small areas. So what I'm doing here is these are simply texture lines. All right. Try not to have them in kind of pattern, very random pattern. Some large ones. And I think I'm going to have to have another one in there, a larger one in there. Okay, so this is where I have to sort of back off and not get too carried away. And now these large ones, I'm going to take and lower the surface. So that actually does end up looking like a hole through there. Now I've got this brush here. It's just a craft brush. It's quite stiff, and I cut the bristles so it ends up being a little bit more stiff, so it kind of catches any little pieces of wood that want to hang on. And now what I'm going to do on the trunk is just do a couple random details on there that will give it that bark look. And I'm not sure how this is going to work. I feel like I need to do a little bit more texturing lines in the tree, but I can always test it. Now, I was actually going to do a test. I was going to test it on the ink and then see how it looks, but it's probably, I thought better of it because it's going to make a real mess. If I have to go back over it with my gouge and do some touch-ups, it's going to be really messy because it's basically going to be wet ink. So anyway, I know there are some things that I want to touch up before I completely cover it with ink. First of all, I forgot to do the outer edge. So I want to do a border here. I'm going to take my V-chisel and do a border there. Okay. Ooh, I love that scroll of curl. All right. And then what I can do, I can end up doing this kind of a rope, just very rough, nothing fancy. I can do a rope along the edge. It's just more of a texture, really nothing defined. Oh wow, that's some pretty random lines, isn't it? All right, so I'm just going to take my V-chisel. Completely going off my lines, but anyway. Usually what happens in this is my chisel does a much better job than my pencil. I don't want it to be exact. Just have some nice random lines. And then as it curves around the corner, by the time you get to the start of that, you need to have it back to that 45-degree angle. And let's see, spin that around there. I'm going to do it this way. I don't want to bump this edge here. And I want to do a little bit more areas in there. All right, I think, yeah, okay. Now I think I'm ready to do it. So if I have to do, oh, wait a minute, have to do any kind of adjusting, if I have to do any adjusting or any fixing and carving on it again, I'm just prepared. I'm probably going to be covered in ink when I recarve it. Okay, the moment of truth. Now, line that up there. I think I'm going to do something else. All right. Ooh, that's kind of neat. Now, rather than pressing it this way, because, well, there's going to be more of a chance for it to actually transfer correctly if I do it this way. And this is actually how they do that, the other kind of ink. And then sort of press it now. I'm just doing it by hand here. We'll see what happens. Ooh, that is really cool. Huh. I think it was a success. So yeah, I mean, it needs a little bit of help. It's probably more of like a roller thing. But that's kind of cool itself right there. I like it. I like it. Yeah, those spaces in the tree. I'm not quite sure about that. They got a little large. It looks like they might be trying to be birds sitting in the tree. Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, you live and learn. So I'm going to go and try this again. A little bit more ink on it. Already getting ink all over me. Yeah, I don't think it would work if I just pressed it down like that. It wouldn't actually, I wouldn't be able to press it along enough of the surface cleanly. All right, just going to do it like this. All right, and ink all over. And there it is. Oh, look at the little Spanish moss. Definitely like it better there. But now it's interesting, actually. If you look at this, let's look closely at this. You can see where the areas are that are still pretty high, probably very close to that final surface right there. And I missed one little area right there. Some of these edges there. So as a result, you've got a line right here and these extended lines. So Anyway, those are the things to think about. But it is funny. Look at that, and it does. This actually looks like a little bird in the tree. So there you go. Anyway, so you can probably see. I think maybe I got a little aggressive with those gaps in the tree itself, but that's kind of fun. And the thing is, you can end up doing any kind of design as long as you can figure out what that final surface is, that flat surface that you want to have transferred. And you know what? Play around with it. There's some things about this that worked really well and some not so good. So just have fun with it and come up with your own designs. Any kind of, it obviously works better if you've got surfaces that you can transfer like this. Now, what I was mentioning about line drawing, you would have to pretty much take all of the background away except for those high edges that would be the outline of whatever the design is. You can do that, a little trickier, but it can certainly be done. And again, this is very similar to that, that block printing. Just taking the background down, leaving high spots. But yeah, that worked out okay. Well, experimenting, that's what this is. But anyway, happy carving.